Hello, everybody. All right. So I want to make an announcement. Well, let's not word it as an announcement. Let me tell you what I'm thinking about and what I'd like to do. And you guys can add comments, or you can comments afterwards. Chat right now if you have feedback on this. I want to move the day. We've been doing Fridays for a long time. My life has changed, and there was a reason why I was doing Fridays. That reason no longer exists, and now I want to do the same time, but on Saturdays. I know that this is probably very inconvenient for you guys in Europe, in Africa, in on that side of the world. I understand that. I want to know how inconvenient it is. Because I know those of you who have performances will probably often be, hello Jeffrey, performances will often be on a Saturday night, so that'll be a problem in Europe. If you perform regularly, you won't be able to make it to this show. I have toyed with the idea of doing a European Q and A and then a American Q and A. Not talking about time zones. That way, people can on both sides can be convenient both ways. I would want feedback from people on that side of the world as to what a good time would be if I did break it up. But for now, all I'm looking at, hello Karen, all I'm looking at for now is to change the day. I want to open up Fridays for teaching and other stuff. So that's the first announcement is yes, I want to be able to move the day. But I want to get feedback from you guys. If you have feedback, don't feel like I'm pressuring you. Sorry. I've got a bit of a cough. Yes, don't feel like you're being pressured, but if you have input, please do share it. All right, now, I want to thank all of you guys. You know, everyone's been leaving such nice comments on these, what you call it, the videos with me and David playing. So that's, I enjoyed doing that. You know, I've been wanting to do a series like that for a long time. And, you know, and I did some of that, right? I went to Ricky Diaz's house, and that was nice. I got to record videos with Ricky Diaz before he passed away. That was very meaningful. It wasn't the best music I've ever recorded because it was hard to follow him. But the meaning of what that was great. But you know, it was just there were so many times I asked people, hey, you want to come over and we'll jam, and it just wasn't happening. So yeah, so it was nice to have David over, and we recorded for almost 4 hours. I've got 4 more tunes left from that series, and then I'll be looking at who do I bring in here next. I'm thinking a piano player next time, piano or guitar. So anyway, what's next? I do have a question that I promised somebody I would answer in the Q&A. So let's start with that question. About a week ago, I resumed playing the trumpet after a 6-year hiatus. This time, my focus is on improving sound quality and range efficiency. In the past, I developed a habit of pressing too hard on the mouthpiece when playing in the upper register. I'm gradually learning to use my abdominal air support to reach high notes, but so far, I've only managed to extend by 1 octave. So I don't know what that means. We can only guess. Extending 1 octave. So was his, what does that mean? Does it mean that his range is up to high C, up to G above high C? I don't know. My first question is, at what point should I consider changing my jaw tongue position? By this I mean the sounds for saying ah and e. Secondly, in the upper register, do I need to move my lips, or should they remain in the same position as when playing low C? All right, so both of those are almost the same question. Because if you boil this down to resistance against air, then now, most people, I'm going to say this, most people, this is not true for everybody, most people keep the air the same and change the resistance. How do you change resistance? You change the tongue arch and the jaw position inside. You change how firm the lips are. And when you change the firmness of the lips, yes, they do curl in. Like as you're going higher, the lips curl farther in. Now, does everybody play like that? See, we have this tendency as people. This is built into our human nature. We have this tendency to think, and I think it's a natural need to simplify everything. Okay, we have a tendency to think that everybody who plays well plays the same, and it's just not true. It's just not true. I remember there in the 90s there was a big argument and online, and people kept saying that they believe that everybody plays the same thing, plays the same way, and even what they're saying out of their mouths, what should be and what should not be, is the same, but from a different perspective. And I knew I could, back then I didn't have the knowledge I have today. I knew back then that that just was not true. I just couldn't prove it. I couldn't prove it verbally. I couldn't prove it with any facts. I just knew. And then I read that book by Finley, Bob Finley, and he explains it. He explains why the people who say you got to do the tongue arch, and the other people say absolutely don't do a tongue arch, and the people who say you gotta move your jaw, the other ones say absolutely don't move your jaw. There are other ones will be saying you gotta have more air for the higher notes. The other ones say there's no such thing as more air for the higher notes. Okay, I knew that just by listening to the way the tone and looking at the way they were all presenting, I knew that each one of those master trumpet players was telling the truth. They weren't ignorantly just saying the same thing as somebody else, but from a different perspective. No, the ones who say don't use the tongue arch, they mean it. Don't use the tongue arch. The ones who say use a tongue arch, they mean it. Use a tongue arch. So this is from Jim Van Irvin. It's all one word. Okay. Jim Van Irvin is asking as if we all play the same way. So that's the first answer to the question is we don't all play the same way. So there is a way to play where the resistance stays the same. And it's all done from the abdomen. And I can't help you decide which one you should do. I can't do that. I think what I've done since I read that Finley book, that was in the 90s. I think what I've done is I found a nice balance. A balance of the different resistances and a balance of the air. So I do use a little bit more air, just a little bit more air for the upper register. Now that gets all whacked out because of dynamics. Because if you're playing a softer note, you're going to use less air. But anyway, each one of us has to find the balance that works for us. Now, let me say this, and I don't think it's been a while since I read the book. I don't think Bob Finley talks about this. The way you sound changes depending on your balance of resistance. So if you're using for resistance only the tongue arch, that's going to sound very, very different from the way I play, because I'm using tongue arch, I'm using jaw position, I'm using the tightness of the lips, I'm using all of those in combination with each other. So, but there are people, and some of those people, they have no choice. You know, what's his name? I forget the guy's name, but there's a famous book out there where the author of the book, I might be getting this a little mixed up. The author of the book was an orchestral trumpet player in one of those northern states, and he was walking to his car or something like that, slipped on the ice, fell, and bashed his face on one of those cement things that they have for keeping people from going over the side of the road. All of his lips were shredded. The teeth were gone. He had to have reconstructive surgery on his teeth. And the lips were shredded. The muscles were shredded. He could not play the way he used to play. He had to use a combination of air and a combination of tongue arch and jaw position to play the trumpet. Because the option of curling the lips in, this is my understanding. If someone out there knows more about this than I do, I invite them to straighten me out. I want to know the truth about all of this stuff. I do not. But my point is, according to what I read with the Finley book, and I've embraced the Finley book entirely, it is possible to have shredded mouth, shredded lips, and still play the horn because you have other sources of resistance. Okay, so let's answer the question straight out. My first question is, at what point should I consider changing my jaw tongue position? You're either going to do that or you're not going to do that. If you're going to do the air thing, then you do the air thing. If you're not going to do the air thing, then you have to do syllables or something else. Now, part of what's missing out of your question is what you sound like. And don't get me wrong, I don't criticize people who just like to play high. Okay? Oh, you did say sound quality. You say that at the beginning. Okay, so now that I see that, so I apologize about that. Now, you did say you're focusing on sound quality and range, and you put sound quality first. A lot of stuff that you do to get a better range, makes you sound terrible, depending on what it is you want to sound like. If you want to sound like a screamer, maybe it doesn't make you sound terrible, but right? But yeah, I guess that depends on what kind of playing you're doing. If you want to sound like Cat Anderson, and I'm not saying Cat Anderson sounds terrible, Cat Anderson sounded great for what he was doing. It's all contextual. It's art, remember? It's art. But if you're going to sound like Cat Anderson, you're probably not going to be playing in a brass quintet, that kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? It's about appropriateness. So when we say bad sound, what we really mean is inappropriate sound. So just be aware of that. Anytime you have less of this balance, so let's if you have too much of this, it forces you to have less of that. If you have less of this, it forces you to have too much of that. Okay? So for example, when we talk about raising the tongue position to get the syllables, if that's all you're doing, then it has a different sound. I know I already said that. Now, same thing with the moving of the lips. When you move your lips, so if you're trying, and I have friends that this is how they play. If you're trying to keep the lips exactly the same for all registers, then your resistance has to come from someplace else. I don't play that way. I play where the resistance change. I'm going to give you a demonstration. You see what's happening? The lips, it's very subtle, but as you go higher, the lips curl a little bit more in. Then they curl a little bit more out for going lower. Now, there are people that say, don't do that. Because the reason why, they don't like that sound. They don't like the sound they get from that kind of playing. Okay? So they want you to keep this the same and change the air and change the tongue arch, stuff like that. They want this to be all the same, all the way through. Now, very important to understand that those are not the same people. And that's why I started with what I started with. Because we have in our simple minds, we have, and I'm saying this about everybody, we have this desire to simplify everything so that the world makes sense to us. That's human nature. We try to simplify everything so everything makes sense. And it's not like that. That simplified idea of the world that we have is just not true. It's not true for trumpet. It's not true for anything. Okay? So, anyway, I think the most important answer to your questions should be that you experiment and find what works for you based on the sound. And don't worry about the range. If you get the sound you're looking for, you can increase the range with that sound. The range should be secondary. Now, one word in here bothers me. Sound quality and range efficiently, that means different things to different people. So just be careful with that word. What we normally mean when we say efficient is more with less effort, right? And I think maybe that's what you're tying that to, using too much pressure. That can be an interpretation of that efficiency, right? That's not what most people mean. Most people are talking about some other stuff. I know a guy that says the way you test your efficiency is how far can you go in the song without taking a breath. Okay, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a crazy word to be using because it has so many different meanings to different people, and those meanings change according to which kind of these embouchures that they have. What kind of physical setup do they have? Okay. Anyway, I hope that helps. Sean says, hello, Sean. I listened to a trumpet podcast, and the person being interviewed blew out all his air and then put the trumpet on his face and played a double C. It's different for each person. I think anybody who plays double C can do that because it doesn't take a lot of air. You know, there's a chart, and I'm going to do this. I'm gonna draw this out. I usually do this in the lessons. So those of you who are my students, just be patient. I like to make a graph. X-axis, Y-axis. And this axis here is for how high are you playing. Okay? And this axis is for how hard you have to try. How much muscle, how much effort do you have to put in to get that high note? Let's put E up here for effort. Okay? Now I'm going to show you how most people see it. Most people see it this way, as a linear equation. Most people think that the higher you go, the more effort you have to put in. Oh, I just messed up my focus. Oh, and now I'm like coloring myself. Now let me show you how it really works. That's why I keep my scrap paper, so I can draw stuff for the students. Let's look at how this really works. Now just to get acclimated again, we've got how high you play here, how much effort you have to put in here, okay? As you go higher, it levels off. It looks more like this. So, let's say here's high C, tuning C. And here's high C. And here's super C. How much effort do you have to put in between here and here? I'm going to tell you, most people who can't play the high notes, this is just my observation. Most people who can't play the high notes, it's because they're overshooting. They're muscling up on something that's not supposed to be muscled up on. That's the biggest reason they can't play the high notes. They're using as much strength and as much effort and as much resistance and as much air They're using as much of all of that stuff as they would for notes that are much, much higher than what they're playing. And because they don't have the control to play those notes, they can't get the notes. What did I just do? Now, what this also suggests, what this chart also suggests, and let me see if I can trick my camera into refocusing on me again. Is that better? Nope, it's still fuzzy. All right. What this also suggests, people will say, well, Eddie, that chart can't be right, because if I have that much strength, then surely I can already play the super C. That's their thinking, right? That's because they think it's about strength. I get a little tired of these advertisements on Facebook. I don't go on Facebook much, but when I do go on, it's all ads. And now it's trumpet ads. There's trumpet ads, like 5 different guys trying to fix my embouchure, right? And they all promise the world. And it's all very predictable, right? They have, it's called the funnel, right? They have this technique for sales where they start with the bait. They don't probably call it bait because that sounds derogatory, but that's what it is, right? So, but anyway, why was I talking about that? Oh, because one of those guys starts his whole thing off saying trumpet is an athletic event. That's absolutely not true. Trumpet is not an athletic event. As you go higher, what has to happen in the lips becomes increasingly more subtle. So that before, at the lower register, changing from here to here got you from A to B. 2 octaves higher, it's like this, A to B. An octave higher than that, it's like this, A to B. The movements get smaller. The change in pressure gets smaller. That's what I have in this chart, right? As you go higher, how much more you need, how much more resistance, how much more air, how much more strength in the lips, how much more you need tapers off. And like I said, I know I said it already, it's worth saying again. Most people who can't play high, it's because of that. It's because they have this other idea that the higher you go, the harder you have to try. The higher you go, the more air you have to use. The higher you go, the more strength you have to have in your lips. It's not true. It's not true. Karen asks a very, very good question here. What are the fingerings for the notes above high C? The fingerings for the notes above high C are typically, there are some people, famous people that have exceptions. The notes above high C are typically the same as the notes an octave below. Now, I'm not supposed to be playing high. I have not played, I think I played 1 super C since November. I think I told you guys in one of these Q and A's, I've been making myself, because of health reasons, stick to high C. But I want to demonstrate this. Watch the valves. let me get a different mouthpiece. This is my bathtub. Okay. Okay. That's my second Super C in 3 months. How much air did I use? How much? That's an interesting point, right? If it takes so much strength to play Super C, if it takes so much strength, then what happens when you go months and months and months without playing it? If it took that much strength, I wouldn't be able to play Super C right now because I'd be out of shape. It doesn't take strength, it takes control. Sean says here familiarity. Familiarity is how you get that control. You do not need more strength to play higher. You do to get to high C. Notice that where high C is, okay, getting to the tuning note C, you're looking at adding extra strength. And then when you get to high C, there is a bit of a curve there. You do need some more effort. Okay, there is more effort involved there. But going from high C to super C, the change in effort is almost imperceivable. I do think we can perceive it more as we get better, but it's not necessary to perceive it. Anyway, yes, that's how you play high. With familiarity, familiarity gives you that control. And the way you get familiarity, see, this is why my method, the one range, remember the one range book is set up so that you maximize that familiarity. Because if you go over your range, what are you becoming familiar with? You're becoming familiar with something else. So we want to take the exercises and all that stuff up to the top of your range. Your current range. We want to go up there, come back down. Go up there, come back down. Every time you dive into that top range, that experience, that addition to your familiarity levels goes up, it goes up, it goes up. And then you have this control that it takes to take it to the next step without doing something weird. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions? I think I owe Sean an answer. Oh, you asked me on text about flugelhorn, and I'm just gonna say I'm not a tech junkie. I'm not the best person to ask about equipment. Do you need a flugelhorn? That's a very personal thing. So, hello, Andrew Garcia. Nice to see you. Andrew says, "Hey Eddie, I'm trying to learn the trumpet, but where I live, there are no teachers. What do I do?" The most important thing is to experiment. We always do the best with what we've got. Now, obviously, one of my answers is going to be you can take internet lessons. That's always an option. I have students that take internet lessons on their phone. It's not ideal, but they get lessons, and the way I teach is not traditional. I think that doing it on your phone with a traditional lesson might not be all that good, because the way traditional lessons work is that the teacher gives you an assignment. You come the next week having prepared that assignment, and the teacher tells you all the stuff you've done wrong. Maybe the teacher, if he's a nice guy, will tell you what you've done right. And then we go on to the next assignment. If it's wrong enough, the teacher might tell you how to fix it. There are some teachers that just tell you, figure it out, come back next week, get it right. And most of that style of teaching is based on what you sound like. I don't teach like that. I teach you how to practice. And those of you who are my students know this about me. We spend most of the time in the lessons practicing. And you know what's weird is traditional lessons, that's supposed to be like the biggest no. You don't do that. Don't practice with the students in the lesson. No. That's terrible. That's exactly how I teach. And you know what? The students that have stuck with me long enough, they know how to practice. I say this very often. It takes longer to learn how to practice than it does to learn how to play the trumpet. So along the way, while they're learning how to practice, they're learning how to play the trumpet, but they're getting a much bigger prize out of that. They're getting a much bigger reward, because what they're taking home with them now is something that they can use on any instrument. It's something that they can use in any aspect of their life, if they think it through. So yes, we practice in the lessons. And different students, based on their practice needs, not what they need to practice to be a better player. That's not what I mean by practice needs. What they need to learn about practicing. So for example, I have students, some of them are watching now, that I don't have to do the tonalization studies with them in the lesson, because I know that they're already doing the tonalization studies on their own. And I've checked them a couple times, and I know that they're doing it right. So if I know they're doing that, there's no reason for us to do that in the lesson. Whereas other students, I'm not convinced that they're doing it right, so we keep still doing the tonalization studies in their lessons. It's a very personal thing. And that's not supposed to be an insult to anybody either. The ones that need tonalization studies in the lessons, that's what they need right now. So that's what we're going to do. When I'm confident that they're doing it right and can do it on their own, then we switch to that. So anyway, my point is, I do internet lessons differently from most people. We spend most of that time learning how to practice. It's not about how good you are. And that's, sometimes people say, oh, Mr. Lewis, you make me so nervous in the lesson. But when they see what kind of lesson that we're teaching, and that it has nothing to do with how good you are, a lot of that nervousness goes away, because there's no judgment whatsoever. And that's why also we can have so much fun, lots of laughing in the lessons. Yes, laughing at the students sometimes. Yes, laughing at me sometimes. If what we're doing is learning how to practice, we don't have to take it so seriously that, If the model for the lesson is I'm the master, you got to come to me and prove to me how worthy you are, then there's no room for laughing. And you know what the problem with the old style lessons is that the world that we live in, musically speaking, is not as homogenous as it used to be. There's so many different ways to be successful as a trumpet player, so many different styles, so many different, um, and there's just no way for one person to say, you know what, you're doing it wrong. There's just no, and when that kind of thing comes up in the lesson, I'll tell the student, I'll say, um, let's try this other articulation. Don't forget how to do that one, but maybe what you're doing right now is not appropriate for this song. So I don't tell them, hey, you just did this wrong. Anyway, my point is, yes, you can do internet lessons. Now that I've said that, and it doesn't have to be with me either, okay? But now that I've said that, do you need to have lessons? Sometimes the answer is yes. I have a student that just started recently. I can't imagine how he would have made the progress he's made without a teacher, because the problems that he had were not obvious. The solution for those problems were not obvious, and he needed someone to help him figure that out. So if you don't have an online teacher and you can't get lessons here in your own city, what do? You experiment. That's what you do. You try this, and the more detailed you are, the more you write down what it was that you experimented with. It should be like a science project. You experiment with this. You try doing it this way, and you try it like that 10 times. Because maybe the first time you didn't really know what you were doing yet. You try it like that, you try it like that, you try it like that. But keep a log, keep a journal. If after 10, 50 times, 10 or 15 times of doing that, if you still can't figure it out, maybe that's not the right way to do it. So change it. And that's what I mean. You experiment. People who have to learn on their own, that's how they become successful, is they try stuff. Okay? You got to get your head out of that idea that there's one way to play. Remember, we were talking about earlier, we were talking about how that we have this oversimplification in our minds of what trumpet playing is really like. We think that there's a right way to play the trumpet. There's no such thing as the right way. There's only such thing as your right way. And for me, as your teacher, what we're looking for is your right way. When I say right way, I'm talking about, should the lips be taut? Should the lips be loose? Should, I've got a student right now that puffs his cheeks, and we will work on that, but we're not going to change that right now, because it's not just some rule that we have to follow. Anyway, I hope that helps. Led asks, that's why it's funny. Oh, he says, that's why it's funny when there is commercial and classical mouthpieces. Right. Only the two. Hello, Gabriel. Nice to see you. Led says, people go for the trumpet sound when the players we listen to usually have an individualistic sound that makes them unique. That's right. Hello, Tus. I can't pronounce your name, but welcome to the chat. He says, just picked up my trumpet after nearly 30 years. I'm having fun. Glad I came across your videos. Well, wonderful. Theus. Okay, Theus. Andrew says, thank you. You're welcome. Gabriel says, is it my birthday? It was my birthday a couple weeks ago, and I haven't taken down this stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, so welcome, Theus. Welcome all of you guys. Any other questions? Karen asks, how was Dizzy Gillespie able to play so well with puffed out cheeks? So that's just a perfect example of what I mean by not everybody plays the same, right? So his orbicularis oris was all he needed. Now, I do believe that with the puffed up cheeks, that it gave something to fight against here. You know, you do have people that play like that. I have a friend that plays with an air pocket up here. Okay. Now, that's how he's always played. If he were to take lessons with me, heaven forbid, but you know, if he were to take lessons with me, would I tell him to stop that? Because it's not like everybody else? I mean, really. So, you know, I'm not going to say I know how he played so well. I just know that it's possible. You know, I'll never forget, there was a brass group that came to Rice University, gave a concert, and there were 4 trumpet players. All 4 of them were famous, and all 4 of them had really weird embouchures. And it was just, for me personally, to see that, I'm like, yeah, you know, there was one guy that had an embouchure like what you see. I call it a clarinet embouchure. You know, where the lips are like bunched up and the instrument's pointing down. This is one of the best trumpet players in the United States, and he's playing like this, right? We are all different. That's been my motto online since the 90s. Led says the main trumpet player from Rebirth Brass Band had a puffed out cheek and neck. He has to play while holding his neck in, but he sounds good. That's exactly right. So, Rebirth Brass Band. Let me see, Rebirth. I know that name. Oh, that's the Houston one. I knew that name. I played a gig with some of those guys at the Fallbrook Baptist Church. There was at least 2 of those guys, I think. I don't play there anymore. But yeah, Rebirth, I knew there was a... Yes, you're right, Gabriel. Oh, there's another one in New Orleans. Okay, I didn't know that. All right, so Sean says, do you have time to demonstrate the swing and the tendency tones? That may be a... So you're talking about in... I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you talking about the second tendency tone study because the other ones are going to be all quarter notes and half notes. So you wouldn't swing that. Let me pull this up. And no, I don't have it memorized. If that's what you're thinking. The memorizing we're talking about, when we talk about memorizing this stuff, is not long-term memory. I can't remember what tune you're doing. So if we're doing Autumn Leaves, and not Autumn Mix, because Autumn Mix you wouldn't swing, it's a Latin tune. So let me scroll down. Now, what I would normally have people do is slur the upbeat to the downbeat. It's like that. You slur the upbeat to the downbeat. There's nothing more to it than that. If you have to write that down, you just write it down. Let me see, make sure I'm not skipping somebody. Led says, if you had to pick just one trumpet player, who would be your overall favorite and why? I know it's a hard question. Well, the reason it's hard is because there's different styles, right? So if we're talking about classical, my favorite trumpet player right now is Bernard Kratzer. And I don't know how famous he is. Let me see if I can get a link. Here's a link to a biography of his. So for the classical stuff, he's my favorite. That just shows you how different I am, right? Most people don't. Most people I've talked to don't even know who this guy is. But he's got the sound and the style and the phrasing and all that stuff that I want to have. So it's almost a sort of trumpet envy kind of thing. I'll have to be honest about that. It's I want to play just like him. I don't care. To me, because of my Christian faith, it never ever mattered how famous somebody was, because when you look at how famous someone is, what you're looking at is how many people like that person. Well, we already know that most people are not good people, right? Most people, and what I mean by good, right? Because the Bible says also that nobody's good. But there are people who are actually out to do you harm, depending on how, Anyway, my point is that there's no reason to go along with what's popular. Going with what's popular will usually get you in trouble. So my favorite classical guy is Bernard Kratzer. Jazz-wise, used to be for a long time Nicholas Payton. Maybe it still is. I haven't really thought about it lately. Used to be Nicholas Payton. And I think the only reason I'm hesitant to say so now is because when I hear when I hear him talk about stuff, I think I would be somebody he probably hates. That's the impression I get, that he would not like me at all. And it's hard to like somebody that doesn't like you. That's you know. So yes, and I'm old enough now where I can't separate somebody's attitude from their music anymore. And if someone has hatred for me, I I'm not as comfortable listening to the music anymore. So that's really, as far as, if the social stuff was out of the picture, he would probably still be my favorite, really. And that's other than that, I don't think I have a favorite. You know what I do say though? I often say this, is that your local guys should be more favorite to you than the stars, which is kind of hand in hand with what I'm talking about here earlier, about about famous people. So like I love to listen to Dennis Dotson, and that might be a name that you're not familiar with. Let me type it in here. Dennis Dotson is a friend of mine. I've done more of his transcriptions than any other trumpet player. I used to have a bag of them, and I don't know if he even knows that. For a while, I wanted to do a transcription book of his solos. Um, yes, Dennis. That's the same Dennis Dotson. That's the same Dennis Dotson. He's a friend of mine. We played a gig together on Saturday, uh, which was nice because the big band stuff is kind of gone. So, and we were even talking about that on the gig. It was nice to play in a big band together again. So I started working with Dennis in the early '90s with different big bands here in Houston. Hello, Cake Man. Cake Man says, "Hey, any tips on improving endurance on the trumpet?" Well, what I said earlier about how most people overshoot on the range because they have this linear concept of of the kind of effort it takes to play higher. If you were to stop that and move more towards familiarity, like I was saying earlier, familiarity gives you control. Control gives you the high notes. The same is actually true for this getting a great sound too. Familiarity is where you get your great sound. That's why long tones are so important for getting a great sound, because you're spending time playing slower materials so that you can get more familiar with the process of getting a good sound. That's not the only thing, but yeah. So yeah, Sean says I'm really liking Markus Stockhausen. Intuitive music. Is that what he calls it? Is intuitive music? Almost like free improv. I got to hear him live. He came to San Antonio. Um, that's some awesome. But you know what? I wouldn't put him in a jazz category. He's one of those outside of the box. He's one of those guys that's outside the box. It's not jazz. It's not classical. You can't put it in a container like that. Yeah, that's some awesome, awesome music and awesome, awesome musicianship. Led says, don't need a lead mouthpiece to play high. You need control. That's true. That's a name I don't know. Gerard Presence. I don't know that name. So the lead mouthpiece thing. So the problem with playing high without the lead mouthpiece is that the notes get a little squirrely. I just played for you a big no-no, right? I just played the super C. I'm not allowed to go. That's a whole octave of above what I'm allowing myself to do. But listen to the difference. Okay, so now each one of those notes with that mouthpiece has a clean. Now listen what happens when I put my deep, how deep my finger goes in there. Look at that. Okay. Okay, it wasn't so bad. It just doesn't lock in as well without the shallow mouthpiece. So the mouthpiece, the lead mouthpiece is an important part. But what you're saying is correct. What you're saying is correct. You don't need the lead mouthpiece to get you to the super C. It doesn't get you the high notes. What it gets you is more clarity on the notes. So I just played super C on this mouthpiece for you, and that's like my fourth or fifth super C in 3 months. Hello, Kanji. Nice to see you. Kanji says, have you tried the wedge mouthpiece? I have not tried. I have a student that plays on a wedge, and he seems to like it. He lives in California. Yeah, I understand the concept. I understand why they design it the way they design it. Not something that appeals to me. Just like theoretically, it doesn't appeal to me. I don't mind just playing on what I've got. Any other questions? I've got to go again. The same chores I had to do last week, I got to do them this week. And if any of you have, I said this at the beginning, if you have any feedback about moving this to Saturday, please let me know. I'm pretty much thinking next week we'll start doing Saturdays. And it's like I forget who I told this. Someone I said you have to experiment. We're going to experiment with this for a little bit. Okay? We're going to start doing 1:30 on Saturdays instead. That'll be Saturday evenings for those of you on the other side of the planet. Okay. All right. Well, wonderful. God bless you guys. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you on the next one.